So when you think of that political discussion of like the haves and the haves not, in the real world, is he one of the have-nots that would never go to Westworld either because he's morally against it or that he can't afford it?
I mean, I think that's a lot more likely than he's a billionaire construction worker.
All right. I'm just saying, maybe he saved up once. Like, we've all gone to Vegas.
Hi, folks. This is Louis Hertham, the original Peter Abernathy. Hell is empty and all the devils are here on the Shout on TV Westworld podcast with Roger, Gene, and Big D.
Welcome to Shout on TV Westworld edition, the unofficial podcast companion piece to the Hey HBO series Westworld. I'm one of your hosts, Roger Roeper, and alongside me are my two co-hosts, Gene Lyons.
You and I are a lot alike.
And our newest host, fresh from Delos R&D, Ashley Schlafly.
Hi, y'all.
And this is our series preview episode where we dive deep into the cast, production, and history of Westworld to calibrate our expectations of the flagship HBO mega series. Westworld is the series that took us from a tiny's 80s and 90s movies podcast into a community with thousands of listeners, multiple TV podcasts, hundreds of podcast episodes. Since our last time together, we launched another podcast. We did Watchmen, which was, there was no Game of Thrones. Some people might know us from Game of Thrones. Some people know us from the OG, from the movies and the Westworld. So I don't know how many of us are joining us from Taboo. That was a great podcast that we launched after Westworld.
Probably as many as are joining us from American Gods, which, by the way, if you guys haven't been following along, American Gods Season 3 is looking like a goddamn trash fire. Like, Orlando Jones has gone rogue. Ricky Whittle has lost his mind. He's starting to use phrases like you're playing the race card.
It's great.
I can't wait for Season 3. I'm gonna cover it like covering a fucking house fire or a car crash.
I think it should be you and the King Bee for 15 minutes each week, just shitting on it. Just, this is everything that you wanted to know. It would be like the Daily. Like, here's all the shit you need to know that happened in this episode in 20 minutes or less. Anyways, with our busy schedules and with the fact that we actually get paid by some listeners to do the movies podcast, we felt we didn't want to stop that and go on a hiatus. So we had to expand the Shat family. And so joining us this season is going to be the wonderful, the very lovely Ashley Schlafly.
Yeah, I'm super excited. I feel like this is in some way like some sort of weird full circle because I actually found Westworld because of your podcast. I had not watched season 1 because I, full spoiler alert, hated both the book and the movie. And so I hadn't watched it on HBO, but after your Game of Thrones coverage, I didn't want to lose your reviews in my life, I guess. And so I started listening. Well, I looked at Taboo and I watched one episode, and then I didn't like you guys quite that much. And so I found Westworld and actually fell in love with the show. So it feels weird to be here because you guys are kind of the reason I even started watching it to begin with.
So you were a listener. This is your Lee Sizemore moment. You've come full circle. Your character arc is complete. You've launched your own podcast with you and your husband that has great reviews. What is that podcast about?
Yeah, so my husband and I, we started a podcast called No Need to Argue. It's presented in seasons, and basically we're looking at one big social issue each season. And this past season, we addressed an issue that's really close to our family, which is addiction and drug use in America. My husband is a recovering heroin, crack, PCP, whatever, name it, addict. And so that's been a really complicated part of our relationship, and our dynamic is something that a lot of people, millions of Americans, go through. And so that was our first season, was kind of addressing that. It recently just wrapped up, and we're looking to start our second season hopefully once Westworld is finished. We're looking at maybe May or June doing season 2.
Thank you again for deciding to join us. Also, Gene, the King Bee, will be joining us. Will Big D be making an appearance at all?
Oh yeah, you're gonna get Big D, you're gonna get the King Bee and Ash Schlafly and you and me, Roger. This is a full court press on Westworld. I think what we realize, as you mentioned, is if we're gonna keep doing movies and do TV, we got to have all hands on deck. So many people reached out and said, "Hey, we loved Watchmen, but where's Big D been?" And he's really pumped about Westworld, so we're excited to have him back.
It should be a good time. And listen, if you hate me, I will probably not be on the first couple podcasts because I'll be traveling around in Europe. So listen, if you're not a fan of Roger Roeper, join for those weeks. But Westworld will air Sundays on HBO here in the United States. We'll watch and tweet Sunday night, followed by an Instacast immediately after show. That's about 15 to 20 minutes. Typically, it's topics that you know that we're going to be discussing on the deep dive, which we'll record Monday and release every Tuesday. And then we do a listener, what we call the Telegraph. It's an email response edition where we record every Wednesday evening. So if you want to write in, if you have your thoughts, your theories on the episode that you want to hear us respond to, the expectation is we'll release those on Friday to hold you over the weekend until Sunday. So that's the format, 3 episodes a week. It's what has tested our friendships every time we do this, but I think we've got it down to a formula. You can email us your thoughts, again, hosts@ShatOnTV, or call us 914-719-SHAT, 914-719-SHAT. Those are fun because we don't have to read it. We just listen to you and then we can respond to it. So we take the best of those, we interact with you, and then if you don't get yours read on the podcast, you can go to our website, shatontv.com, where we post all the emails, the telegraphs that we receive, and then that's where we'll respond to them. So if you send us an email, we're not going to respond to it. We're going to put it on the website and then have everyone see it. So if you don't want us to post it, though, make sure you put private and we won't post it on the website. So that is what we'll be doing. Thank you so much. So the first thing that we want to talk about is just some of the production and casting notes. Ashley, you've got some great insight into what's happened since season 2.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy to think that the series, the season 2 finale was all the way back on June 24th, 2018. It's been a significant amount of time since season 2 wrapped up. And season 3 actually began filming in 2019. We know for sure that they filmed in downtown Los Angeles. They did a 10-day stint overseas in Singapore, where actually all the main cast of characters, including Evan Rachel Wood, who plays Dolores, and Thandie Newton, who plays Maeve, they were there. And they filmed in multiple locations in Singapore, including the Helix Bridge. Have you guys ever seen that before?
Is it shaped like a helix? Is that the?
Yeah, it's shaped like a double helix. I mean, it's really wicked looking.
All the cool stuff is overseas. Listen, we can't. Our bridges are crumbling over here. You think we got a cool helix bridge? No.
When I found out that the number one reason for tourism to America was shopping, I was very, very depressed.
Were you really surprised by it, though?
We have no culture.
Yeah, I thought it was like people wanted to see, I don't know, our national parks. I don't know, like fucking our culture that they brought here.
So basically the Mall of America. I mean, that's what they're coming to see.
We're the South America of the world. That's what I'm saying. Like everyone views us as like we do. We view South America.
I thought you were going to say that South America is the South America of the world, because it is.
So showrunners have responded to a lot of the criticism that, including you guys, had during season 2, which is that season 2 was a little jumpy in terms of the timelines. It was very difficult to follow, and it was almost obtuse to the point of ridiculousness in some respects. So the showrunners, Jonathan Nolan and Lisa Joy, have said they promise that this season it's going to be much friendlier in terms of one timeline that is linear, and that the story is going to be much simpler for the average viewer to follow.
Yeah, I'm super relieved to hear that, because that was, as you mentioned, one of my complaints for season 2. And it's nice to see that public opinion swayed the show on the wrong path, but now it seems that public opinion is swaying it back to the right path, because, in season 1, there's references to parts of the Delos parks being quote unquote market tested, or the results of focus groups. And I really feel that's what led season 2 astray. Like season 1 was near perfection. And it seemed to me, and again, I have no knowledge of what happened behind the scenes, but season 2 felt like the showrunners took all the buzz from season 1. They saw what people were talking about on the internet and on podcasts, and they tried to amplify those aspects of the show. And in doing so, they made it a little too wacky for the audience. Like it's too many puzzles, too many jumps, too many mysteries for the audience to play along with. And the story suffered for that. But what was interesting is that upon binge rewatch, which we did for this episode, for this preview, I would argue that season 2 is actually a lot more straightforward than it seemed when we watched it in weekly installments.
Well, I mean, I think that the difference is, like, in season 1, you had this enigma of the maze, right? And that was this underlying question that drove so much of season 1. And so it was one thing that they were focusing on. And it was one switch of these timelines that merged in a really smart way, because we didn't know for a while, like we were unaware that the timelines were separate with the Man in Black versus William. And so it was these massive reveals that we were able to participate in and be surprised by. But they kind of gave it away in season 2 in that first episode by letting us know when Bernard wakes up on the beach that we're dealing with a multitude of perspectives. And it wasn't just one maze. It was a door, and it was the forge, and it was this, and it was Maeve's powers, and it was Dolores over here becoming angry woman, number 1. And it was just too much. It was like a bad escape room. I don't know if you've ever been to one, but there's really good escape rooms. And then there's ones that are like overtly complicated that nobody can fucking get out of. And that's what it felt like, was they were just trying to push so much and up the bar so much and going, okay, we've got smart viewers. And they became really lacking in self-awareness by assuming that everybody that watches that show is going to be somebody with a PhD that's sitting there, that's somebody that's an expert at puzzles and an expert at a guessing game, that people just weren't.
Well, don't you feel like that was kind of like the Mr. Robot situation? Like Mr. Robot kind of took that turn as well and lost a lot of its mainstream viewers. I feel like that may have happened with Westworld, where a lot of people, it became mainstream. It was like this underground water cooler show that just kind of spread like wildfire, and it was in the zeitgeist all of season 1, and then everyone was excited for season 2. And by like episode 3 or 4, people started to wane on it. Are they going to show back up for season 3?
To give Jonathan Nolan and Lisa Joy a little bit of credit, it's got to be very difficult when you surprise people in a genuine way, because that happens so infrequently now in television and in movies. Most of the time, people, because of Reddit and because of this overt water cooler discussion that's moved online, there isn't so much of a surprise anymore. People predict stuff. I mean, look at Watchmen. People had it pegged that Cal was, spoiler alert, and in like episode 2, people were writing into your show. And so it's very difficult to have an organic surprise. And so here they had it with the what door, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, with Bernard. And then all of a sudden it's like, well, shit, what are we going to do? How are we going to one up that? And I think that they didn't do the smart thing, which was to just stay true to what the show was in the first season. They tried to one up themselves. And I think writers and producers and directors get into a really sticky spot when that's their intent, is to confuse and surprise rather than just to write a really good narrative.
Yeah. So if they're taking that linear approach, so what happens between, like, what can we expect? Because this time we're going to be out of the park.
Yeah, well, it's been announced that the events of season 3, they're going to pick up immediately after the close of season 2. And that's going to be much like the relationship between season 1 and 2. They both kind of happened in terms of a linear event once you put all the pieces together, right? And so basically, it's been confirmed that the season's going to focus on Dolores and her allies and what's being called Neo Los Angeles. And then there's this other piece that's going to be Maeve in another sector of the park, which they've released as War World, which is set in a Nazi-occupied Italy during World War II.
In season 1 of doing Westworld, we got questions, are there other types of parks? And then in season 2, we got the confirmation with Shogun World and the Raj. And then people started writing in, they were like, what if there was a World War II? Are we to understand that just like when we play Battlefield, you could side on the Germans and be the oppressor? Are you going to be part of that movement in this world? Like, are you either oppressing Jewish people or not oppressing them? Is that a big subject line here?
I mean, there's a lot more to World War II, I think, than the Holocaust. But I would say that.
Wait a minute. You're going to make a World War II world and not make it about the Holocaust?
Right. I mean, it could be about war, like the actual battle.
Like, we're going to make the Pacific. We're going to make the.
Well, no, it's Italy.
Oh, it's Italy.
What really worries me, though, is that there has been speculation of the whole outside world that we see, like Neo LA actually being future world as a park. And I can see why. If you look at the season 3 trailers, it does seem like some pretty advanced technology. But I really do hope that we're not fed that surprise and that there is actually an outside world we get to see.
Well, yeah, I mean, and I think too that what the show has told us is that there's that scene with Stubbs where we see all the medieval gear, and there's a lot of people who believe that was confirmation that a medieval world exists. And if it's like the book, there'll also be a Roman world. And you're joking, Roger, about how it's kind of a fascist Italy, but if you look at all the different parks, I mean, Sweetwater is all about women being subject to trauma and violence, and it's not a time of much free will, the Wild West. And then you've got the Raj, which is all about India under British rule, and Shogun World is feudal Japan. And then you've got, the Weimar Republic and fascist Italy. So I think there's this underlying theme throughout all of them, which is that Delos chose to create all these different sectors of the park that are sectors in time and moments in time where free will was absolutely not possible for one group of people.
But isn't that kind of the idea of Neo Los Angeles? Dolores gets out to the world and realizes that like there's people profiting off of the robots in a different way. It's not just a theme park. It's literally how humans have built their society.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be a really interesting juxtaposition that they're setting up with her coming to the realization that the only humans she has encountered are the 1%. I mean, they're maybe even like the 0.5%. I mean, they're these incredibly privileged people that can afford 40 grand a day to attend these parks. And she's never encountered the average Joe, out in the world. And I think that's going to be interesting for her because even if you look at today, it doesn't have to be Neo Los Angeles. If you look at somebody who's a blue collar worker, if you interviewed them, I think would feel that they have much less free will than somebody who's got immense amounts of means that are able to choose certain things and take care of themselves in certain ways. Just look at the coronavirus that's coming, the way that people are preparing based on their discretionary income. I mean, it just changes their ability to act in the world and to have agency within the world. And I think that's going to be an interesting piece for her to encounter somebody like this Aaron Paul character who is not like any human that she's encountered before.
I think it's a good time to talk about the cast that's come back. So you talk about Evan Rachel Wood. She's returning as Dolores. Who else is returning?
So confirmed that's returning. As you said, Evan Rachel Wood. Thandie Newton is going to be returning as Maeve, Ed Harris as William / the Man in Black, and Jeffrey Wright as Bernard, and Tessa Thompson, who's going to be playing the Charlotte Hale doppelganger. They've been confirmed to be coming back. And then it's also rumored that James Marsden, who plays Teddy Flood, that he's going to be coming back. He did that really cryptic interview a couple of weeks ago that said, on this show, nobody that's dead ever stays dead. And so I think we can assume that he probably is going to return. And then Anthony Hopkins, there's been no word yet that he's coming back as Robert Ford. I personally am holding out hope he's somebody I would like to see pop back up, but he also has not been confirmed. But he showed up in season 2, and I think that he's still got a bigger role to play in season 3. So I'm hoping we get at least a couple episodes with him here and there.
Yeah, what's interesting is that even though Tessa Thompson's returning, she's playing like a different character because as she's leaving, like her body was swapped, right, with the Dolores Pearl. Luke Hemsworth, I didn't realize this or maybe I completely forgot it. Did you guys catch that he's a host as well at the end of season 2?
Oh, yeah. This was a big topic of discussion in the pod last season was that exchange between Stubbs and Charloris. There was definitely like a little wink and a nod. Right. That it's almost certain that he is. Also, the fact that I know he's a Hemsworth, but he also doesn't seem to age, which might be an indicator. You guys mentioned Anthony Hopkins and James Marsden as two actors who may or may not be back. I think it's much more likely that we see a return of Robert Ford than we do of a Teddy Flood. I really got the feeling from the show that him being kind of uploaded into the Valley Beyond, into the Sublime, was really a farewell to that character. Whereas with Anthony Hopkins, there's just, if he's willing to come back, I don't see there's any way that the show says no to him. And it doesn't need to be said. We all know it. But Anthony Hopkins was amazing in every episode. When I watched this rewatch, I was like, Jesus Christ, this guy played a morally ambiguous character. He demonstrated power and frailty at the same time. And every time he was on screen, I believed more in the world that they were creating. Like, he made the show. And I can't emphasize enough that if he's not a part of it, it does suffer.
Yeah, the best parts of season 2 is when Ford is around. Again, that's all I watch. I didn't go back and watch season 1 because I was like, I think I've closed that chapter in my life. But when he's not around, when the show rests on the back of Jeffrey Wright, and this is no dig on Jeffrey Wright. Jeffrey Wright's a wonderful actor. But when Dr. Ford is on screen, when Anthony Hopkins is on screen, the show just sizzles. And I feel like it loses steam. And that's why they had to do almost 2 episodes really focused on Kikasuya and Akane when they went to Shogun World. Whereas in season 1, you could have just done a couple Ford episodes and it would have been amazing.
Well, I think it's because he's such a dynamic character. I think that's what you're seeing. I mean, Robert Ford is written so well. And like you said, Gene, I mean, he's so morally ambiguous. He's your classic anti-hero. You can't help but root for him at some point because he is this great emancipator, but he's also really a terrible person, which I forgot going back and watching season 1. That's when I remembered how nasty of a person he actually was with what he did to Bernard and the way he made, Bernard kill people and made Bernard forget, and just his entire moral outlook it's not just ambiguous. I mean, I think it leans toward being pretty dark and pretty nefarious at times. He is really acting out of guilt, and guilt is self-interest, right? So is he really an emancipator, or is he just trying to assuage himself of the guilt of Arnold dying? And so he becomes this really complex entity, and Anthony Hopkins, I mean, nobody's better than him. So I would love to see him come back, because I don't think Ford's storyline is done. I think that he's going to have a bigger role to play, because I don't think he just left the host with the plan and just go leave and then that's it. I think he's much smarter than that, and that it's going to be more complex than that.
There's a few new characters that we can look forward to coming back. The two main characters that we've been seeing a lot of have been Aaron Paul, which a lot of us know from Breaking Bad fame, and then Vincent Cassell, who's been in movies and other TV shows. But let's talk about Aaron Paul's character first. What do we know so far?
So we know that he's a construction worker, which we've kind of mentioned. His name is Caleb. He lives in this neo Los Angeles, and the trailers show a lot of his interactions with Dolores. We have been told by the showrunners that he's going to challenge Dolores's ideas of humanity. And I think that it's really exciting to have Aaron Paul, because he's a really good actor. I mean, I think they're adding another really strong, versatile actor to the show. For those of you who didn't watch Breaking Bad, you may know him from a variety of movies. He was in Van Wilder. He was in Mission Impossible 3, Last House on the Left, but he is known most for his work on Breaking Bad and also on an HBO show that I felt was really, really underrated, which was Big Love. He played Scott on Big Love for multiple seasons, and I think he brings a lot of acting chops and a new type of character that they're going to be introducing to this storyline.
And this is the character that most seems to be interacting with Dolores. And again, according to Jonathan Nolan, he's the kind of character that would not go to Westworld. So does that mean that he is more of the working class? You see him working construction. So when you think of that political discussion of like the haves and the haves not, in the real world, is he one of the have-nots that would never go to Westworld either because he's morally against it or that he can't afford it?
I mean, I think that's a lot more likely than he's a billionaire construction worker.
All right. I'm just saying, maybe he saved up once. Like, we've all gone to Vegas. Are we ready, though, to let Aaron Paul be a big part of the show? A lot of people are on the fence about him. Some people really like him, but a lot of people didn't like El Camino, and a lot of people said it was because of Aaron Paul. Like, there was no...
Who didn't like El Camino?
I think King B did not like El Camino.
Oh, wow.
King B doesn't like anything.
It's true.
I think that we're definitely ready. I mean, I think he's got a big hurdle to overcome because, I mean, Jesse Pinkman is such a big personality and such an iconic character. I think anytime somebody plays a role like that, it's difficult for them to take on a different role, the next big one. But I mean, I think he's a great actor.
Well, Vincent Cassell, he's people will recognize this character, this actor, when you see him. But what has he been in?
Vincent Cassell, he's a French actor, and he was in a lot of French films before making his name in the States in the Oceans movies. He played the bad guy Night Fox in both Oceans 12 and 13. He also played the ballet director. That he was fantastic in Black Swan. And he was in Jason Bourne as well, the 2016 Jason Bourne. And we're going to be seeing his character. We know that he's a villain of sorts. There is that moment in the official trailer where he's asking Maeve to go kill Dolores. So we can assume that he has some sort of interest in Dolores not being out in the real world. And I personally, this is a theory of mine, I think that he might be the first employee of Insight that we are seeing. Have you guys seen all of the kind of virtual reality game and everything like that that's online for this company Insight that's being introduced this season?
I am admittedly really shitty at following up on any of the meta stuff that goes along with Westworld. Like, people are like, did you check out the website? I'm like, no, I watched the TV show. But I do love how good they are at picking like these corporate names that sound like actual corporate names, like Delos and Insight. It works so perfectly. Like, it gives you that gross feeling of like, oh, they probably do team builders and personality assessments to find out more about each other.
Well, it's actually exactly like that. HBO is kind of teasing this use of this company. And apparently what we know is that they collect data on humans and then they use it to actually make choices for them. So it's a super high level version of a Facebook ad, basically.
Ash, I like that you're referring to Vincent Cassell's character as a villain because he wants Maeve to go kill Dolores, whose stated goal is to take over the world and extinguish mankind. Cool.
We know who's Team Dolores this season.
Right. In my defense, the showrunners have said that he's a villain. So you can take it up with them. So another character that's coming on that I'm super excited about is Lena Waithe. She is playing a role on the show. We actually know nothing about the role. The only moment we see her in the trailer is when she's walking with Caleb and in another scene where she seems to be robbing something. So we're not sure kind of what side of the good or bad aisle she's on. But if you're not familiar with Lena Waithe, you should become familiar immediately because she's fantastic. She is a writer and producer. She writes for that show, Dear White People. Most people know her face, though, from the Aziz Ansari show Masters of None, where she plays Denise, and she actually just won an Emmy for writing on the Thanksgiving episode from season 2, which I think is one of the best episodes of television in a really long time. And I have a huge general crush on her. I think that she's incredible. And to have somebody of her caliber on the show, that's kind of this up and coming young woman of color actress that's just so powerful. I'm really excited to see what she does on a show like this.
Yeah, if you're not a big fan of Master of None, I don't blame you because some of the episodes are downright horrible, but she is a fantastic character, of Master of None. And the way that she plays off of Aziz Ansari, she makes him better. Because sometimes he can be fucking annoying, but she really helps him out on that show. So check her out. I'm excited to have her on Westworld.
This season's going to be a lot of actors that you're like, oh, I've seen this guy before. Where have I seen this? This next one, I'm like, oh yeah, I remember this guy. It's John Gallagher Jr.
Yeah, so if you're a Broadway fan, you know John Gallagher Jr. He originated the role of Moritz in Spring Awakening. He was in the Green Day musical, and on television and movies, he's kind of made a name for himself within the past couple of years. He was in that movie 10 Cloverfield Lane. He was in that great indie film Short Term 12. And on television, he played the role of Jim Harper in HBO's The Newsroom and in the HBO miniseries Olive Kitteridge. I'll be honest, I don't know what kind of role he's going to take in this show unless he's a scientist, because he's kind of a nerdy guy.
Yeah, he was like that on The Newsroom. He was the Jim Halpert. He was the Jim Halpert of The Newsroom, which, looking back on that show, I know it was on HBO. We typically hold shows on HBO at a higher standard, but that show, looking back on it, was so self-righteous and borderline insufferable.
Oddly enough, it's something that the King Bee did like.
He did like it? He liked The Newsroom?
He loved it.
Go back and watch it. It goes off the rails quickly. But then there's a couple of like celebrities that when I read that they were on the show, I was like, oh, like, are they just trying to pay for influencers here? Like, are we trying to buy people to watch this that normally would not watch a show like this?
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about Scott Kid Cudi Mescudi and Marshawn Lynch. So Kid Cudi,
right.
If you're unfamiliar with him, he's a rapper, he's a songwriter, he's a producer. He was famously discovered by Kanye West. Take that with a grain of salt, maybe, that I do. But he's sold 16 million records worldwide. And he was in HBO's Make It in America. I'll be honest, I never watched that film. And then he's also in the Cleveland Show and Brooklyn Nine-Nine, also two shows that I've never seen before.
Oh,
but I think it's interesting that he's going to be in it. We'll see what he does.
I think the best thing that Kid Cudi was in was the infamous YouTube video where he punches a fan for throwing a wallet at him on stage. It's one of the smoothest like punches and return to stage I've ever seen.
Really?
Kudos to him for that.
I'm sure he's fine. I mean, he's done stuff before, but like, when I heard Marshawn Lynch was going to be on Westworld, first I thought to myself, is he a host? Is he like, what is he playing? What role is he going to be in? But I could see Marshawn Lynch, just like he did for the Seahawks this season, where he came back and was their playoff starter. I could see him crushing this role.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we'll find out. I mean, I know that he was on, again, Brooklyn Nine-Nine. I guess that's a common thread there.
That's where you got to go before you can get to Westworld. You got to do a stint over at Brooklyn Nine-Nine.
Apparently, Andy Samberg is the gatekeeper to HBO shows.
That's right. He's an executive producer this season.
But we don't know what he's going to be. Just like Lena Waithe's character, just like Kid Cudi, we don't have any idea. It does look like he is with Caleb and Lena Waithe in that one scene. And I mentioned the robbery. There's a lot of theories online that they're robbing something, maybe a bank. I mean, we really don't know. So he's kind of another wild card.
He looks more like it's Matrix style. Like he's like a bodyguard.
Yeah, they do. They do look very Matrixy. Both he and Lena Waithe in their dress and in the way they carry themselves, sans those really tiny sunglasses they wear in the Matrix. But there's another actor on the show that I'm actually excited to see what he does, which is Michael Ealy. I think he's a really underrated actor. We don't know anything definitive about his role, but up until now, he's mostly done some films and mostly network TV. And a lot of these network TV shows, I think a lot of people probably, maybe the audience that watches Westworld hasn't watched, but he was in like Sleeper Cell: American Terrorist, which apparently he also received a Golden Globe nod for. I'd never heard of this show before, but he was in The Good Wife, he was in The Following, he was in Secrets and Lies. And whether you like those shows or not, he's always really good in them. Like the roles that he plays, even if the material isn't as good of it isn't as good a quality as he is. He's fantastic. He's the one that's most memorable in those shows. And he's also the super hot guy in Beyonce's Halo video, if anybody remembers that. And also in that Mariah Carey video from 2005, he's that beautiful man with the blue eyes. So he's bringing some beauty to the show. I think he's going to be a host because of how beautiful he is. That is a prediction of mine.
Yeah, if anybody's noticing a pattern here with the actors that Ashley just mentioned, we should note that Westworld is continuing now a 3-season tradition of having more Black characters than your average show. And yes, I understand by saying that most of the characters are still white people, but I'm interested to see, as we saw Black hosts playing roles that they might not have always played in the actual Old West. And race wasn't really overtly discussed. There were some hints there, but nothing really in seasons 1 and 2 that went overtly at race. I'm interested to see if race is a topic we'll encounter as we move outside of the park, especially with all these characters. So it adds an exciting dimension potentially to the show.
I agree. And, just coming off the Watchmen coverage, I think that Watchmen, we talked at length on that show about how a lot of people believe it really dropped the ball on race relations, that it took on this huge task of speaking to what race in America is, and it didn't maybe see that through in the way that a lot of people found satisfying. And I'm curious to see how a show of this caliber kind of takes up that baton and maybe looks at, an issue that probably, it not only affected Westworld, but if the world is anything like it is today, it's certainly affecting Neo Los Angeles. So I think we're going to have this socioeconomic piece with the have and have nots. And I think it'll be interesting if they introduce a race piece as well.
And then there's one more character that some people might be familiar with.
Yeah, Tommy Flanagan. Tommy Flanagan is going to be on this season. Nothing definitive as far as his role, but he's the scarred up Chibs on Sons of Anarchy and on the spinoff show, Mayans MC. He also had that really memorable role in Braveheart. And he's been in a variety of other things. I think he's super fun. I think he's a great actor, and I'm curious to see what they do with him.
Yeah, and when we're talking about a scarred up face, we're not talking about Hector with like the cute little eye scar. We're talking about like, you'll recognize this guy when you see him from Braveheart. And what happened was he was leaving a pub one night and was attacked by a group of dudes, tried to fight him off, and he got cut up pretty good. Got slashed from ear to ear. So dude is pretty hardcore, and I'm excited to see him as well. I've never seen Sons of Anarchy, but I've watched Braveheart about 100 times.
Yeah, that's not a good show worth rewatching, Sons of Anarchy. It's not great, but he's good. During the rewatch, guys, we were texting back and forth in Slack. So I thought we'd use this section to just kind of highlight those moments that made Westworld special and put them in episodic order. Gene, you start off right from the get-go, the pilot, season 1, episode 1.
Yeah, Raj, as I sat down to take notes on all these episodes that did the rewatch, there's 20 to choose from. And I thought, okay, Gene, like come up with a scale. Don't get ahead of yourself. Don't bite the first thing you see. And episode 1 starts up, the original. As soon as we enter Sweetwater, I'm like, holy shit, this show is amazing. I didn't realize when we first watched it, we were all new to the show, what all was going on in episode 1 compared to a pilot episode of other shows. A rewatch revealed that Westworld basically told us the entire story in the first episode. I would consider it a masterclass in what a premiere should be. It presented the main concepts, the main characters, and really changed our perception of Westworld from the book and the film to what the HBO series would become.
Well, it also had that iconic moment of Dolores swatting the fly at the end. I mean, it was such a beautiful way to end that first episode, because it's a moment that all this possibility opened up for what the host could become, because up until that point, they kind of were presented as, really fancy robots. And so having her swat the fly at the end, and then that whole malfunction of, Peter Abernathy, I mean, it set up a really fascinating new world, and it built a whole world in only one episode, which a lot of shows are not able to do.
When Abernathy pulls up the photo from Times Square, I'm like, that happened in this episode? When Dolores swats the fly, I'm like, that happened in this one episode? It's insane that they packed so much into this pilot. And I remember I'm glad you mentioned the fly swatting thing, because as Dolores did it, I was like, oh. We did a podcast on the show. I've seen this episode easily 5-6 times, and I still was like gasped when it happened. It's just testament to quality. Episode 2 was great. It showed us the park in its golden era. It revealed what the future looks like behind the scenes. But episode 3, The Stray, gave Westworld a whole new dimension by diving deep into some extra topics that we don't usually expect from sci-fi, namely feminism and free will. It's where we realize that all the horrors that were rained down upon Dolores for decades actually are the same horrors that women endured for centuries and continue to endure. Dolores represents a person being property. Her sole purpose is to be the object of affection. She's a prize to be won. She's an obsession for William. The family that she loves is taken away repeatedly. These are all things that happen to women. And what's crazy is that Teddy, the guy who's supposed to protect her, is actually revealed to be the tool that keeps her in a loop. And she doesn't even get weapons permission to protect herself until, of course, she finally does.
Well, I think that the showrunners in the episode before this one, they introduce the concept of the fact that the narratives that the hosts have, that their cornerstone are all based on suffering. And if it's based on suffering, then they are much more legitimate. They're much more realistic. And I think that that plays in really well to what you're talking about with this idea of how suffering begets sentience, and how, that the sentient nature that they have is necessary for her to be able to find, and for Maeve to be able to find this eventual freedom and agency outside of those loops. And it was a really interesting way to explore those issues, and it opened the door to what became a whole season of this female empowerment that we weren't seeing on other shows.
Do you believe that over time the park becomes to more manipulate? Like, it's no longer just a data gathering exercise, it's actually manipulating who you are or what direction you'll take in these adventures. Like, the more you go back, the more it learns from you. So now the park becomes more of a microcosm of how society is and how we still oppress women.
Yeah, it makes sense if your clientele is primarily men coming to visit. And as we see with William's experience, the park is catering to your desires in order to entrance you and lure you in and keep you hooked to get you addicted, as Logan points out. That makes perfect sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think it also is echoed in season 2 when we encounter the Logan AI in the library, because that's basically what he's saying when they're etching in the code into James Delos's book. And he says to them, they are all subject to their code. And once you figure out a few things that they do, it's very easy to predict, because they can't act much outside of their nature. And so I think that that's what you're seeing, is that it started out as a way for people to express and experience and act on their deepest desires. And then this data mining piece came into it. And what an interesting commentary on modern society, that the way that they create our consciousness in an afterlife to make us immortal is to take our basest desires and the worst parts of ourselves. I think that's a really interesting commentary about mankind. It's kind of depressing, but I think it's pretty accurate. So everything changes in episode 7. This is one of the ones that I chose when Bernard says that really iconic line, what door? And we realize that he's a host, and all of a sudden it makes you totally rethink everything about the show that you've been watching, because you think by episode 7, you know who these cast of characters are, and you put them in these good categories and heroes and these bad categories and villains. And all of a sudden Bernard, who's been kind of the eyes that we see this whole story through, we can't even trust his eyes, because he is a host and he is manipulated by Ford. And there's that great moment at the end where he is forced to kill Teresa, and all of a sudden Bernard becomes ambiguous too. I mean, you gasped out loud in the first one. I gasped out loud again watching it in episode 7. And this is probably the third time I've seen season 1, because I did a rewatch before season 2. And so I gasped out loud and went, oh my gosh, I forgot how dark this reveal was and how brilliant this reveal was.
And what I love about that moment too, the what door moment, is the show didn't linger on it for too long. Everything else was going on as planned. Teresa just goes and opens the door, and Bernard's just sitting there with the lantern, and they didn't have a big build up to it. It just hit you out of nowhere. And it was such a fantastic moment. And I agree that episode 7 is a exceptional episode, but for a slightly different reason. I think that episode 7 is really also where some of the more far-fetched aspects of the show began to appear. It was a little bit of a harbinger for season 2, where we started to see things like, a personal 3D printer that can also make a host. Well, if those exist, why the fuck would you have a giant factory?
Right.
Areas of the park that haven't been surveyed by humans. Yeah, that seems totally safe. Hidden compartments. It opens up the story to these infinite possibilities. But the danger there is it gave writers license to get rather absurd at times. And so I think that this was a high point for the show, or one of the high points of the show, but also it opened the door, no pun intended, to some dangerous aspects.
Yeah, and you see that in season 2, which I think is one of the weaknesses. And everywhere has an elevator or an access point. And I guess people talked about that, but it was like the convenient elevator, the convenient trash chute.
It's like Mario Brothers.
Everything has a tunnel that we got to go down into. So I get where you're going with that. Now everyone has, there's a printer offsite as well. And we're going to make more hosts over there. All right, so who all has these printers? There seems to be widely available.
Now, an episode that I think I might have panned when we first covered it, upon rewatch, I really appreciated, was episode 10, the Bicameral Minds. This is the season 1 finale. And I know it seems obvious that a season finale be a key episode, but the Bicameral Mind is admittedly one of the best season finales I've ever seen. I think the first time I watched it, I was like, oh, it's getting so hokey. Hector's grinning and Armistice is happy about her new submachine gun. And it's just getting a little too silly. There's blood everywhere. It's turned into a horror movie. But on rewatch, I realized that this episode capped off a season that started strong and ended strong, because what it did was showed us that Westworld fit an incredible amount of story into just 10 episodes. And then they had this supersized installment that brought together not only a dozen key characters, but it brought together and fused different time frames, all the loops, the differing philosophies, the warring factions, all the side stories, and even differing realities with this mechanical precision, and had heart to it. And I think this is what sets episode 10 apart from, say, the season finale for season 2, is that there was an element of heart to it, but also there was just this mechanical, it was just like Ford orchestrated the whole thing. Everything fit right into the right place, and all the stories ended in a deeply satisfactory manner. You had Ford's death and Maeve's mission and Bernard's role all coming to a close. And then also out of that sprung all these new beginnings, with the host rebellion and the Man in Black's dream coming true of an even playing field, Dolores' new powers being revealed. I can't stress what a quality episode this was.
And I think it left it open enough for season 2 to kind of be its own thing. I mean, they did such a smart thing that I think it's so difficult for shows to do, where they left it in a satisfying way, where they tied enough up, but left themselves enough room to come back in season 2 to kind of take things on in a new way. They didn't pigeonhole themselves or shut too many doors. And I think that's a really complicated thing to do. And they did. And while we may not be totally satisfied with the way that they approach things in season 2, they at least left themselves open to now come back in season 3, even going back to season 1. They set multiple seasons up in the future for us to, kind of enjoy and explore alongside them.
Yeah, one thing that we're not going to do in our breakdown of season 2 is talk about timelines. Listen, there's plenty of websites out there that you can go. You can find out the timeline for yourself. We're not going to break down the timeline. We're just going to talk about some of the highlights from season 2, which starts at episode 4.
Yeah, so episode 4 is entitled Riddle of the Sphinx, and this is the one where Delos finds out that he's a host, or that his human consciousness has been put into a host body. And I think that not only was this episode really interesting in the way that it was presented narratively, it also presented this great idea of the fact that if you don't know you're a host and you're not actually human, does it matter? And that was a really interesting twist on the question that William posed to Angela in season 1, where she says to them, well, if you don't know they're real, does it matter? And that switch between, the them hosts to you humans, I thought was really, really compelling. And it also set up the rest of the season as we were introduced to this new wild card of, human red balls that could be in those brittle water filter CPU things in their brains and the black host balls. It presented this really interesting new twist to what was possible in this world.
But let's just talk about it as a television episode. This episode did all the things you want from TV. It was funny, it was touching, it was exciting, and it was also terrifying. Remember, this is the episode where we get the amazing dance scene in Jim Dalas's cell. We get that comically disturbing masturbation scene, and then it turns into hell on earth. And of course, we had the birth of the term Daddy Delos, all from this one episode. It's a testament to Westworld being a show without genre. You can't say this is just a sci-fi show or a horror show. It's not a comedy or a drama. It's just something different. It reminded me a lot of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. When people say, what kind of show is Buffy? How do you answer that?
A great one.
Why do they need to, if they're just going to delete him, why don't they just shut him down? Why do they have to firebomb the entire cage?
I think we learned that from them not burning Maeve's entire brothel to the ground each time. Is any little bit of evidence, any little thing that they can leave themselves as a reminder or a trigger can throw the whole fucking thing off. If you've got billions of dollars, presumably from the Delos, fortune, then you've got to be as careful as possible. I mean, look at any scientific experiment. It would be the same thing. You got to start with a completely sterile environment. You
would think they would just kind of rotate the sterile environment. They would just have 5 pods. All right, this one didn't work. All right, let's go to the next sterile unit, and then we'll have this net. We'll clean this other one that he just used. We don't have to firebomb the entire facility. This seems reckless.
Yeah, but there was some writer in the writer's room that was like, but then we lose the metaphor of hell. We got to keep burning the thing. People will see the fire and understand.
What about red lights? Do we have a red light?
We already used that in the control room.
Oh, we did that already. But the show did divert a couple times and kind of go off into additional strange areas, like when it introduced Shogun World. Like at the end, it was kind of a teaser. It was kind of fun in season 1, but in season 2, they were like, "Oh, you guys like extra worlds? We're going to give you multiple ones." The first one was Shogun World.
So season 2, episode 5, Akane no Mai, we do get introduced to Shogun World, but I don't care anything about Shogun World. I think that this episode is really important for one thing, that is the fact that Dolores remakes Teddy in this episode. So at the end, she shows Teddy that carcass of the diseased cow, and she basically remakes him, and she has Bernard, go in and changes his source code so his aggression and his violence are higher, and that his loyalty is changed. And it's a death of Teddy in a way that we haven't seen before, because we see these physical deaths almost comically all throughout the first season and second season. And now it's kind of a death of his personality and his cornerstone and what makes him him. And I think it just changes everything for us, because it shows that Dolores's power and control is growing. And it also shows how far down the human rabbit hole she's willing to go, because she's stacking the deck. She's cheating the game, there's nothing more human than that. And so we see her act in a human way, I think, for the very first time.
Ash, when I saw you pick this episode, I was pretty surprised. Out of the 20 episodes that you would have gone with season 2, episode 5, which a lot of people considered like filler. People labeled this a filler episode because it was just like, oh, it's indulgent. They're just going to, Shogun World to show some guys playing with swords, whatever, ninjas, yada, yada. But now that you highlight this, it makes a lot of sense. We see Dolores's brand of liberty and Maeve's ideas of freedom diverge throughout season 2, including when they first encounter each other. And Maeve's like, well, aren't you going to let me pass? Like, don't you believe in liberty? And there are two parties kind of, pass like ships in the night there. But this episode 5, solidifies that fork in the road, where you see that Dolores she's put Wyatt in the driver's seat. And we have to remember, as we move into season 3 as well, that the original, that Dolores model, still has two narratives alive within her at this point. Another thing I noticed again in this rewatch was the amount of blood and killing. The body count on the show is absolutely bonkers, and I loved watching it all over again and really just appreciating the action as opposed to taking notes the whole time.
We got some beheading. We got an arm chop off. We got to see some intestines. We got to see someone's like go from like neck mouth. What do you call that? That's not quite a
can opener.
Yeah, the can opener on his head. It also gave us back our two favorite body shop felines, Sylvester and Felix, which kind of answered that question of will they ever come back? Are they going to come back in season 2? Obviously, I think they're going to be the ones to possibly repair Maeve in season 3. So maybe they'll be back. They're not confirmed cast, but it'd be neat to see our friend Ptolemy Slocum again. But what was interesting is the show didn't need to diverge from the world of Westworld to tell a good story, which seems to be the highlight for many in this episode or in this season was episode 8, Kiksuya.
Yeah, this is by far, and I'm not alone in this, so it's completely cliche at this point, but this is by far my favorite episode of season 2. And I think a lot of people felt the same way. Just this simple line, "This is the wrong world," I think said so much setting up the rest of the season. And I think it's so important because not only did we have this beautiful love story in a non-cheesy and in a non-forced way, but we also found out of this idea that the hosts have this ability to change their motivations. And we see the effect that the revelries, the virus has on other original hosts in this episode. And Westworld is all about questions. It presents all of these different ideas and these different concepts. And it introduced this idea of love being programming. And, you know, if it kind of gave more of a complexity to Maeve's search for her daughter because she loved her daughter the same way our main character's looking for his loved one in this. And it's kind of like, does it matter if it's real or programming if they believe that way and they think it and it drives them? And really, who gets to decide what's real and what's not? And I think that was a really cool concept. And I think it was just an absolutely beautiful hour of storytelling.
The King Bee and I watched this episode together and just marveled at how beautifully the story was told. And I really hope that season 3 is more Kiksuya and less Akane no Mai. Despite the stuff that you highlighted, Shogun World did feel kind of silly and shallow compared to the depth and emotional weight of Kiksuya. We followed the single character, Akichita, and experienced more of the narrative aspect of Westworld than the puzzle aspect. Also, this was a big payoff for me because I feared that Ghost Nation would be treated in that stereotypical way that TV shows treat American Indians. And this was a very tender view and also kind of a view from the other side of the world, which I feel if it wasn't the best episode of Westworld, it's definitely like in the top 3.
Maybe it was because I had binge watched all 10 episodes over, a 2-day period. It just seems to drag. I felt like they could have done Akane, they could have done Shogun World and Kiksuya all in one episode, or better yet, throw in the Raj and do all 3 in one episode. Maybe this is a 7-episode season. Listen, Raj has got to, clean out some closets this weekend.
So 2 things I'm taking away from that. One is that basically all the minorities can get piled into a single episode. That's cool.
That's right. Just give him February, the shortest month.
And then 2 is that somehow the release date of Westworld sprung up on you. Like you didn't, in the 2 years, you didn't have time to rewatch it, to get it all done in one day. But if you were in a hurry to get through these episodes, then I could see where Kiksuya would be a problem because it's a movie into itself. And it does have it takes its time telling you the tale.
And then the final episode of episode 2, where everything comes together and says, hey, we've tried the season-long experiment. Did you like it?
The Passenger, I think, that's where we left off, right? That's the last thing we have leading up to this new season. And while I don't think it was as strong of a season finale as the Bicameral Mind that we talked about just a few seconds ago, they do give us a lot of satisfying answers. We find out that the door is actually a real thing. It's not like the maze. We get to see a lot of the hosts go into the Valley Beyond, which is really satisfying. The Forge is destroyed and Dolores leaves as Charlotte. Bernard is awoken again in the real world. And they pack a lot of narrative storytelling into this one really, really tight storyline, I think. And I had actually forgotten until I rewatched it this past week how long this episode was. It was a beast. You talk about a movie into itself. I mean, this was a movie. I mean, it was a movie feature length, and I think that was really necessary. And I think it was a trade-off. We got to Kiksuya and we got some other things in season 2, so they had to make this episode a bit longer. But I do think it was interesting, and it definitely left me enough of those nuggets there for me to be interested to watch again and figure out where they're going to go in season 3.
I had some complaints about season 2's finale, The Passenger. I think namely they just tried to put too much in there. There was some cool stuff, like the bull stampede inside of the Mesa was pretty fucking cool. But then they mixed it in with like Maeve looking like a Jedi. The whole thing with Clementine, like being like the scrambler bot and stuff. I was like, come on. Like
zombie. She's zombie Clementine.
Right. I mean, could it have been more obvious that, she's riding on the pale horse of death? I mean, that was a little, I almost felt like there was somebody new in the writer's room that week, like somebody that didn't quite get that Westworld isn't as obvious, because there were a lot of really heavy-handed pieces of imagery in that episode. I mean, I'll definitely give you that.
But I think one complaint that people had that goes right up to the top, up to Lisa Joy, is that post-credit scene after season 2, episode 10, where you see William. He's in the future, apparently this apocalyptic future, and a lot of people are just like, what the fuck is going on here? So the man in black encounters the image of his daughter, who's clearly not his daughter because she is long dead, and she's come back to him in this apocalyptic future. And Lisa Joy, in explaining this, says definitively, like, that's not William's original incarnation, and the version of him that was quote unquote human is somewhere lying dead. This is some other version of him now. But she stopped short of saying that he's a host. Thanks, Lisa Joy.
It seems pretty straightforward that this is, kind of a hybrid host version, or they've reached the conclusion of a very long Turing test, where this is possibly the longest anyone of this human hybrid host has lasted.
Well, I mean, I think that it felt like something at the end of a series finale. It didn't feel like something at the end of a season finale. It didn't feel like it was setting us up for something that was about to come. It felt like it was almost like a fan service to say, look at him, he's become his worst fear. He's become one of these hosts. It didn't feel like it fit in at all with what happened, the hour and a half prior.
If that wasn't enough, though, there's 3 questions I got to ask leading into season 3. The first is, who's in the consciousness in the pearls? At the end, we see Charloris, who is Dolores in the body of a host, Charlotte Hale, leaving the park with 5 consciousness pearls. 1 we know is Bernard. Who are the other 4? People are supposing that one of them could be Peter Abernathy, her father. We know she spent a lot of her time in Charlotte's body trying to find the Abernathy pearl. If that's the case, who are the others 3, or is Peter Abernathy even in the bag?
I think this is one of those questions that allows us to highlight. You can write in for our telegraph that'll come out next week. So this is listener mail episode. This will be hosts@shatontv.com, or call us at 914-719-SHAT and leave a voicemail. But I was pretty sure at the end of season 2, I knew who the 5 were. In rewatching seasons 1 and 2, I have no idea.
I think this is going to be a make or break moment for me in season 3, and whether or not I'm going to really enjoy it or not, because I think they could go really cliche and it be all people that Dolores loved in the park, and those are the only people she saved. I think it would be a lot more interesting if she saved those people that could, be beneficial to her in terms of the mission she's on to destroy humanity. I just think it would be really kind of a bummer if it were, Peter Abernathy and Angela and Clementine, or, just people that she interacted with. Well, maybe not Clementine, but people that she interacted with in the park, Teddy, if they all come back. I think that would be kind of a letdown I hope it's people that surprise us.
The next question, will we see the Valley Beyond again? Again, Dolores said she sent the Valley Beyond safely to an undisclosed location via satellite. But where, we don't know. Should we take her at her word that no one will ever be able to access again? Because we see her punch the console. And I'm like, really? You're going to punch the console? A 1980s trope for computers. When you want to break it, you just punch it. The Han Solo method of just kind of breaking the terminal. you would think that a cloud system could be accessed anywhere.
Yeah, I hope not. God, I hope that the Valley Beyond does not come back. Yeah, I think it's way too complicated. I mean, we're already going to have Maeve and, her counterparts in the park, and we're going to have Dolores with this whole new cast of characters. I think it's going to get really messy, and we're done. Be done with it,
Anyway, the last question I have for you guys is there seems to be a Bernard versus Team Dolores. We got a Jedi thing going on here where at the end of season 2, Dolores brings back a Bernard and she says to him, there has to be a villain. There has to be some sort of balance. So there has to be the Jedi and there has to be the Sith here in order to be balanced. My question is, if you have a limited amount of pearls that you're going to bring back to the mainland because you want to overthrow humanity, if you are assembling your crack team of D&D players, why would you want to waste one of them on Magneto? Why would you want to bring in your villain?
Well, if Magneto was essentially a modified Arnold who basically built everything and started it all, I think that would be one good reason. But I think Raj, that she's interacted with him more than any other person, even more than Teddy. And so if anybody knows her, if anyone can help her improve, if anyone is capable to be an instrument in her ultimate goal, I think it would be Bernard. And so there's also no reason to really see Bernard as a threat.
I mean, he was more violent toward the hosts than he was humans, right? Because he was the person that was upholding their prison sentence basically by sending them back out again. But I think that the other thing too is I think in a way Dolores almost feels responsible for Bernard, because there's that moment in season 2 where she talks about how she's the one who created him. She's the one who made him and did all of the fidelity testing with him. And I think what we've seen is Dolores's greatest weakness is the people that she feels attached, or the hosts more particularly, that she feels attached to. And I think she's got some sort of attachment to Bernard that's going to be very difficult for her to break. And she's in a new place and feeling very, very out of touch. And Bernard, I think, is useful too, because his backstory is in a modern world. Dolores's is not.
So you don't think there's going to be a Team Bernard versus Team Dolores situation? You think that everyone's just going to be Team Dolores?
Well, you said Magneto, right? I think that Magneto is Dolores and Professor X is Maeve. I think that Bernard is somebody totally different. I mean, he's Cyclops or Storm. I don't know. I don't really know X-Men that well, but he's one of the other characters.
I don't even think they're X-Men anymore.
Whatever they are. I mean, I think that Bernard is kind of this whole other ball of wax. And I think that's why you see him in the trailer. I mean, it looks like he's out in the middle of nowhere. It doesn't look like he's in New Los Angeles or anything like that. I think he's not going to be as intensive a player in terms of that pejorative good and bad, that binary right and wrong. I think he complicates that.
Also, Jeffrey Wright with the haircut looks totally different. Like, I love Fuzzy Bernard, where it was just like a beard and hair and then just like some facial features kind of poking out of there. But he looks tough with the haircut. I like it.
Yeah, I think Jeffrey Wright was like, listen, if I'm coming back for season 3, I want to look like a badass.
Also, the backside of his body doesn't seem to match the front side of his body. I don't know if they used a body double, but like he's kind of got like a little bit of a belly from the front side, but the backside when he's naked, he's got a nice firm ass, good legs,
looking good,
good back muscles. It's weird.
Well, speaking of Jeffrey Wright's backside, our wish list for season 3. What do you want most from the season? What's your biggest fear? We'll start with you, Ash.
So I just hope that Ford's greater plan is revealed. Like I said, I think that he has more to say. There's that moment when Bernard actually encounters Maeve for the first time in season 1, where he's explaining to her all the choices when he realizes she's sentient, and he's explaining to her all the choices that she's making. And he says, well, and Ford says, when you leave the park, then you're going to, and there was more there. She cuts him off. So, I mean, I think that right there puts that Easter egg out there that, hey, this is coming, right? That there's more. I think there's more hosts in the world. And I hope that that's revealed rather quickly. I've already insinuated, I hope that the dead stay dead, whether they are really dead in terms of Ealy, the Man in Black's daughter, or just the people that have gone on to the Valley Beyond. And I also just hope that we don't turn into that black and white, these people are good, these people are bad. I hope it stays complex and even gets even more complex and more dark. I feel like season 2 got dark in an interesting way, and I would like to see season 3 expand on the complexity of that darkness. And finally, just that Hector, Felix, and Sylvester, that there's as much of them as possible, because the 3 of them, I think, are really, really funny characters and great comedic relief. I would even be fine if Sizemore came back from the dead. I just said I hope the dead don't come back, but if he came back in some way, I would be fine with it, because I really like those secondary characters, and I think those are those moments of comic relief that a show like this, that really needs.
What about you, Gene? What are your wishes and fears for season 3?
Raj, Jonathan Nolan told Entertainment Weekly, he said that season 3 was going to be a little less of a guessing game and more of an experience with the hosts finally getting to meet their makers. And I hope that's the case. My big hope for season 3 is that we get a lot more substance and fewer games. I don't need to play with the show. I want the show to tell me a story that is powerful and moving and thought-provoking. And I'm optimistic because IndieWire in an interview with Nolan discovered that Westworld 3 is supposed to tell a linear story. There will not be a time jump, or at least not like we saw in season 2. And so I hope that's really straightforward. My big fear is that this turns into some sort of an iRobot sort of thing, or something we've seen before, right? Where it's just like, oh, it's mech suits and robots and it's a fight for the future. Because the action scenes in the trailer look amazing, and if they can pair that with the complexity and maturity that Westworld's shown so far, I think we're in for a treat.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you, Gene. I'm hoping it's not a straight ripoff of Future World, where the entire mission of harvesting Westworld guests were to create host versions of the rich and powerful in order to control the political world and all of its riches. I'm hoping that they can tell a new story in this corporate fascist environment that this hell world that we live in today. I am fearful that the season's straightforward linear format may turn off the viewers that stuck around because they just love the mystery and the intrigue and the podcast that they listen to 3 times a week plus more. Like if it's straightforward, will they continue to tune in? I don't know, but I think this is going to be the tipping point, just like another series that we used to love, like Walking Dead. Like season 2 was a pivotal moment for them where they lost a lot of their mainstream viewers. And then season 3, they were like, ugh, this show's kind of going off the rails. And then people didn't show up for subsequent seasons. The diehards stuck around for a little bit longer, but I don't know anyone who's still watching that hellhole of a show. Like, but knowing that they put the guardrails on this, like they're like, we're doing 5 seasons and that's it. At least they know where they're going to end. I just hope that they have a fleshed out story, and I hope season 3 is good for all the reasons we love season 1.
Yeah, one thing I am a little bit worried about that I didn't put in the notes at all, but I think is important to bring up is this season will be shorter than the previous 2. Yeah. And as we saw with Game of Thrones, that could be a dangerous game to play because 10 feels about right for a series. With as much as Westworld attempts to explore, 8 episodes seems like a very, very short season. So I hope that they narrow down what they're trying to address into a very specific type of show, and at least have this chapter in Westworld history be very tight.
I'm kind of on the 8 episode bandwagon these days. I feel like it's the perfect balance between like a shitty season, like 6 episodes, and it's not quite as long as 13. Remember when Netflix, all of the shows were 13 episodes? And you were like, oh, there's 13 of these? Like, and then it went down to 10.
I think it depends on what they do with the 8 episodes, though. Like if all 8 episodes are an hour and 15 minutes, an hour and 30 minutes, I think we're getting into Game of Thrones territory where they're trying to cram so much into those fewer episodes. I think if they're going to do 8 episodes, I hope that they're solidly 1-hour episodes that address, a 1-hour storyline in a really direct way, because I think it can get out of control. I tend to agree with Gene. I like the 10 episodes. I think that it's a solid way to tell a story with it peaking around 5 and everything kind of revving up from there into the penultimate episode and then the finale. I mean, if we think about that, I mean, really it'll have to start building in like episode 3 and then the penultimate will be 7 and then the finale will be 8. I mean, that seems very fast, especially for a show that only comes out every 2 years.
It'll be interesting. Listen, I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to doing the show with you and with others, King B, Big D, welcome to the show, Ash Schlafly. Thank you so much. If you want to send in your thoughts, your ideas, maybe to some of the questions, maybe to things that you want us to highlight, we are doing a Telegraph episode. That'll be our final episode before we do our Instacast of season 1. Westworld debuts in the United States March 15th on HBO. Overseas, check your local listings. I think on Monday is usually when it comes out for our overseas viewers. But we hope you join in and subscribe and don't miss an episode. Thank you so much for joining us. That concludes this week's episode of Shat on TV Westworld Edition. Be sure to follow us on social media and share with a friend. We're on Twitter, Snapchat, and Instagram. Just follow @Shat. That's @Shat on TV. We're also on Facebook. Find us on our website, shatontv.com, and that email, hosts@shatontv.com. You can also call in with your thoughts. Please keep it to 2 minutes or less. 914-719-SHAT. 914-719-SHAT. If you don't feel like typing out your thoughts, we're everywhere fine podcasts can be found, including iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, Pandora, Spotify, and YouTube. Be sure to subscribe. And if you stop by iTunes, leave a 5-star review. That does help the podcast grow. On behalf of my co-hosts, Big D, Gene Lyons, the King Bee, Ashley Schlafly, I'm Roger Roeper. Be sure to join us next podcast for the Telegraph, the Westworld Telegraph, the final of our preview episodes. Thank you so much for listening. Take care. Good night and good luck. Sorry that went long.
It won't be long when I'm done with it.